This is the Drawn to It pouch and is, I hope, your new go-to pencil case pattern that you will love to sew. With a two-toned outer with the fabrics, you can use fat quarters or scraps to make it really unique. And there's no bias binding on the inside at all. You will love learning the technique for boxing the corners with a lined construction, and it's a fast sew too. Hi, I'm Emma from Studio 77 and I'll be taking you through this tutorial step by step. We would love to see your finished projects, so please do tag Studio 77 on your social posts. So let's get started. So for this project, I've gathered some tools that we're going to need. You're going to need some scissors, your regular pins. I've got some double-sided sewing tape here. It's really important that it's sewing double-sided tape, not regular, because we are going to be putting it close to, if not under the needle. You're going to be using a lighter if you have a zipper by the meter or by the yard. We've got a friction pen here. I've got a ruler that we're going to need. You could possibly use a tape measure as well. And of course you're going to need your zipper. So this is zipper by the meter that I have prepped up with a pull attached. And this needs to be 28.5 centimeters or 11.25 inches, and that is stated in the pattern as well. You can use a regular short bought off the peg zipper too, totally fine. You just need to make sure it's at least this length. If it's not, you can chop it down to match. Throughout this project, I have used a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, unless stated, which is basically when we do the zipper edge, we're going to be using a 1/4 of an inch or 0.7 millimeter seam allowance there. I'm going to be using a 3.5 stitch length for my top stitching, and I'm going to be using 2.5 for all my structural seams. So you want to download the pattern and print it out. And you can find the information on how to get that in the description of this video too. Once you've cut the pattern out, you will notice that all of the seam allowance is drawn onto the pattern. You're going to need to cut out a stabilizer which is slightly smaller. You can either print the pattern twice, or like I have here, just fold under along the dotted lines so that you get the smaller size for your stabilizer. So you're going to fuse your interfacing onto your pattern pieces first, and then you're going to cut out. I have used these two contrasting fabric choices from Liberty for the outer, and then for this video I'm going to use this navy blue Liberty for the lining. That's to help you differentiate on the video. Of course, when you're doing yours, you can use just 2 fat quarters and differentiate them between the lining and the outer. You're going to want to have 2 of your tabs, 1 for each end, and then I have got 2 of the pattern piece 1, which is actually the top of the bag, and then I've got 1 of pattern piece 2, which is the bottom of our bag. So that's our outer pieces. Then I've got the same for our lining. So I've got 1 of pattern piece 2 and 2 of pattern piece 1. It's worth noting, if you are using a directional print, that you're going to want to bear in mind where the top of your pattern piece is. For this pattern piece 1, this is where the zipper is going to go, so bear that in mind. Once you've cut those out, you're also going to want to cut out your stabilizer, and these are going to be without the seam allowance. So just like I said before, you're going to want to cut them along the dotted line so that they are smaller. And like I mentioned before, you're going to want to prep up your zipper. This is where our lighter comes in play. So you want to very carefully, you're going to show the flame to the edge of the zipper to seal it. You don't have to do this. You could use fray check, or you could even zigzag over the edge if you want to seal it. Totally fine. But this is a really quick method. Always have a glass of water to hand in case of any accidents, of course, and you're making sure you're not catching it on fire. You are just showing the flame to the edge. If you have bought this kind of zipper by the meter and are not sure how to put on the pull, you can find a link as well below that has details on the video that I have on how to place zippers onto zipper tape. So I'm going to place my lining pieces to one side for a second and talk about the stabilizer. If you haven't used stabilizer before, it's really simple to place on. So I'm going to imagine I'm at my ironing board right now and turn all my pieces so that they are right side down. And we're not doing this for our tab pieces, so pop those out of the way. You're going to grab your stabilizer and you're going to place them so they are within the seam allowance, lined up. Now remember, we have a smaller seam allowance along the top of pattern piece 1. This is a 1/4 inch or 0.7 centimetre seam allowance along there and 1 centimetre throughout everywhere else. So we're going to place them so that the fusible side, the side with the dots, is facing the wrong side of your interfaced fabric. Then I'm going to take it over to the ironing board. I'm going to flip the piece over. I'm going to place a Teflon sheet or baking paper on top to protect the fabric, and then I'm going to press with the iron 10 seconds each time going along. We're pressing, not ironing. And we're going to do the same with our other pattern piece too here. Okay, so I've fused the stabilizer in place. Having the interfacing on there first helps the stabilizer to stick really nicely to it. Once you've fused that in place, you need to let the glue cool down. So we're going to move along to our tabs and we're going to make those first. So we're going to start off with our tabs. We want to find the middle and draw a line using our friction pen. Then we're going to fold each edge in to meet that line, and we're going to give that a good press with the iron, and then we're going to fold it in half again and give that a good press too. The friction pen just helps us to do that really nice and neatly. Okay, so I've pressed both of those now. I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch along each edge 1/8 inch or a couple of millimeters from each edge along the long sides. Okay, so I've stitched those. I'm just going to fold each one in half and pop a pin, and then I'm going to pop them to one side for later. Next we're going to work on the zipper. So of course we're going to need our zipper. We're going to need our 2 pattern piece 1 linings and our 2 pattern piece 1 outers. And this is where our double-sided tape comes in. So I just need 1 outer and 1 lining to begin with. Grab our zip tape and we're going to place our double-sided tape along one edge. This is 1/4 inch double-sided tape, but it's good if you can get the slightly thinner one, which is 1/8 inch or 3 millimeters. We're going to place our long edge so that it is right side down, so the zipper and the outer are right side facing, and you will find that it matches up, so not the shorter side but the longer end as shown in the pattern piece. And you're going to place that right side down all the way along that edge. And you want to try and match up the edge as well as you can to make it nice and neat. At this stage you can baste that in place, or if you are using the double-sided tape, I'm going to place some more double-sided tape on the back of the zipper and place the lining on top, right side down to the back of the zipper. Then I'm going to stitch that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance going all the way along, or 0.7 centimetre seam allowance. It's good to use a smaller foot for this stage so you can get as close to the teeth as possible. With that sewn, we're going to turn it so that it is right sides out, or wrong sides together. And we're going to stitch all the way along that zipper edge with a top stitch. So 3.5 stitch length for me, and we're going a couple of millimeters or 1/8 inch from that fold. Okay, with that sewn, we're going to repeat that process with the other side. So with those two sides attached, we're then going to grab one of our tabs that we stitched earlier, and we're going to place it on the end of the zipper, which is the kind of closed end. So here's my open end, and this is my closed end. So we're going to place that on, and then I'm going to baste about 1/2 centimetre or around about 1/4 of an inch from that end, and the tab is going to be placed central to the width of the zipper. So with that tab basted on that end, we're not going to do the other tab just yet. We're going to keep that to one side. We're going to grab our outer piece, pattern piece 2. I'm going to lay that so that they are right sides together. Then we're going to grab the outer 2 layers, and we're going to place them along that edge, pinning as we go, matching up each corner of each end. I'm going to turn the whole piece around, and I'm going to match up the other side. Again, I'm not grabbing the lining, it's only the outer piece. I'm going to make sure that the 2 lining pieces are well out of the way. So I'm going to stitch from the side with the lining attached to it so that I don't stitch that in by accident. And then I'm going to stitch with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance along each of those 2 edges. So now you're going to see why we didn't baste on the other tab, because we're going to open our zipper right up and down to that bottom where it's now closed with the tab, and we're going to open the whole thing so that we can stitch. We're going to top stitch along those 2 lines that we have just stitched. Okay, so we're going to top stitch, pushing and making sure the lining is well out of the way first of all, and we're pushing our seam allowance either way. You can either push it towards the top of the zipper or the top of the bag, or you can push it down to the bottom of the bag, and whichever way you push it is whichever way you're going to do your top stitch line, and you're going to sew around about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. I'm going to push the seams to the bottom of the bag, and so I'm going to be stitching on this bottom part, pattern piece 2, and we're going to do that on both seams. So with that top stitched on each of those seams, you're going to find that your project is probably the right way out. So we're going to turn it the wrong way out again. And we've got, I'm going to shut that zipper closed for a second, and you're going to find that your lining is facing the right side up. So you're going to grab your other lining piece, your pattern piece 2, and you're going to lay that so that it matches right sides together. You're going to do the same as we did on the other side with the outer fabric, but this time you're going to leave a turning hole of around 10 centimetres or 4 inches along one of these sides. So I'm going to put the pins in on one side, and then I am going to make sure that my zipper is open because we are going to use that to turn it through. I like to feed, because I am using the zipper tape, before I close it or open it, I like to feed in the nylon teeth so that it keeps a nice structure for when we sew this end here. Pin the other side. And then just like before, we're going to sew these edges with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, remembering that one side is going to have your turning hole. Doesn't matter which side. So now all of your pieces are stitched together. You've got one turning hole in one seam of the lining. You're then going to grab your other tab and find the end which doesn't have the tab on it, the zipper end, and we're going to place that same as we did on the other end, and we're just going to baste that in place. While we're basting, we're not going to go through all the layers, so we're just going through the zipper part to keep that in place, keep the tab in place. So now we've got the tabs in place. We're then going to grab the 3 layers. So you've got the zipper part of the panel, you've got the lining, and then you've got the other outer fabric. Place them all together so the zipper panel is sandwiched, and then we're going to stitch along that end 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam along that edge. And we're going to do the same on both sides. Remember, it's totally fine to sew over your zip, you just need to go a little bit slower, possibly hand crank over the actual zipper. Okay, so it's going to look like that. Now is the little bit of origami of this project. This bit can be a little bit tricky to get your head around, so feel free to go back and watch this video, this part, over until you understand it. But basically we are boxing these corners. If you've ever boxed a bag before, you're going to know kind of what we're doing, but we are boxing them so that we are attaching the lining and the outer at the same time. So to do that, in case you haven't done it before, I'm going to grab these holes which have not been stitched up yet. I'm going to grab the outer, doesn't matter which corner you start with, and I'm going to maneuver it so that we are matching the side seam with the end seam. So we're matching up those 2 points and finding the edge. Okay, for this part I am going to use clips because it's a little bit easier until we have got it in the place that we need it to be. Just the outer to the outer, like so. Then I'm going to maneuver it around so that I have just got the lining, same corner. And again, we're matching up the corner, or the seam to the seam, I should say. Move it around. The hardest bit is the rest of the bag that wants to fight you. Once you've got that in place, I'm going to pop a pin in there. And a pin in here. We're then going to match the 2 together so that that zipper part, open that up right up inside to give us a bit more maneuverability, and we're matching the 2 together. So now we have got that zipper end, that side seam of the bag, sandwiched in between the lining and the outer on that corner. So we've got 4 layers either side of that end seam, like so. Kind of looks a bit strange at this point, but you just have to trust the process a little bit. I'm then going to stitch that with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance just along that corner. So that is stitched. It's going to look a little bit funky for a minute. Then we're going to try and pull out the opposite corner, the opposite side of that end, and we're going to do the same thing. So outer to outer, matching up those seams, and then lining to lining. And again, stitch along that edge. So like I say, it looks a little bit funky, it looks like some kind of weird chicken. So now we're going to do the same on the other two ends. Don't be afraid to manipulate the fabric. That zipper's not going to open too much because you've got the basted ends on there. You just want to make sure that when you're doing this that you are going with the way that the seam allowance has been stitched. So because we top stitched the outer, the seam allowance is going one way, and with the lining we've already just stitched the other end, so you just want to make sure that it's following the same way that you're pushing the seam allowance. So for me, the lining is facing upwards, so I'm just going to make sure that the lining is facing upwards on this end too. So I've pinned those two corners in place. I'm now going to stitch them on the machine, again with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, with all the corners boxed and stitched, we're then going to open the hole in our lining and we're going to turn the whole thing the right way out. Push out all the seams. And then of course you've got a hole in the lining. So we're just going to reach through, turn the bag the wrong way out. Then you're going to push your seam allowance whichever way you have stitched the seam allowance. So my seam allowance is wanting to go up. You may find that your seam allowance is wanting to go down. So you have it lay nice and flat how it wants to. Then you're going to fold over the other edge so that it meets it. And it's going to be, of course, around about a 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance, because that is what we've used on the two ends. Then we're going to grab some pins and pin that in place, and we're going to hand stitch that closed. I like to use a ladder stitch to do that, sometimes called a baseball stitch as well. I've got some white thread here, so hopefully you can see it a bit better, but of course you should use a thread that blends in with your fabric. So I'm going to start off at one end, put my needle in so that it comes out, and tuck my tail away. Then I'm going to go in one side few millimeters, and then I'm going to go in the fold the other side a few millimeters, following the edge of that fold. Again in one side and then in the other side, and then I'm going to continue that all the way along to close the hole. And I'm just catching the lining as I sew. Now I've finished that line of stitching, of course I'm going to cast off and cut the thread, and then you have finished. All you have to do is turn your bag the right way out. If you're finding that you've got any creases from the way that you've been working the bag, you can put a small towel inside or a washcloth and give it a little bit of a press to have it laying nice and flat, exactly how you want it to be, and is ready to be filled up and used for all your goodies. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you've loved this tutorial. I've been Emma from Studio 77. I really hope you love the rest of the festival, and I'll see you soon.